The notification that her sister was dead came through a public shipping incident feed, not a personal channel, because the Vorreth Compact did not classify the destruction of the Meridian Lark as a fatality event. They classified it as a routing anomaly. Zara Osai was 22 years old and sitting in the Interstellar Legal Services intake office on Gallara Station when the feed updated. She had a stack of transit claim files on her desk and a cup of tea that was still hot. The timestamp on the incident report read 4 hours and 11 minutes ago. The Meridian Lark had been a civilian passenger ferry carrying 109 people, traders, students, a family of Dravathi pilgrims, a 17-year-old girl named Adiz Osai who had been traveling back to the Kepler belt after 3 months visiting her older sister. The Vorreth Compact's patrol fleet had intercepted the Lark 6 minutes inside Compact-designated transit space. The Compact's official assessment was that the ferry had deviated from its declared corridor. The deviation measured 11 kilometers. The Compact's patrol fleet had fired once. The Lark had come apart in approximately 4 seconds. Zara sat with the incident report open on her screen for 49 seconds. Then she closed it. She picked up the intake file on top of her stack. She worked through her entire queue that afternoon, because there was nothing else her hands knew how to do. She did not cry until she got back to her quarters. She cried for a long time, and when she was done, she washed her face and sat down at her desk with a glass of water and the Compact's incident report, which she had saved before they updated it, and she began to read it as a lawyer. Zara had not set out to become a lawyer. She had been a freight route analyst for 2 years out of secondary school, tracking shipping corridors for a mid-sized logistics firm, until a routine route dispute had landed in arbitration, and the assigned counsel had asked her to explain the deviation data to the panel. She had explained it in 8 minutes. The arbitrator had stopped her halfway through to ask who had prepared her. She had said she prepared herself. The arbitrator had given her a card. The firm's xenolegal division was not glamorous work. It was filings and cross-references, and the slow accumulation of procedural fluency, learning which treaty clauses had binding arbitration authority, which had soft compliance language, which had been amended quietly in the years since ratification. She had spent a year and a half reading agreements that her colleagues skimmed and treaties that her supervisors assumed she would not understand for another decade. She had been at Gallara Station for 14 months when Adiz died, working intake cases for the firm's xenolegal division, transit violations, customs disputes, boundary certification filings. Small cases. The kind of work that builds fluency in the language of law before anyone trusts you with the language of consequence. She was fluent enough. The Vorreth Compact's incident report ran to 23 pages. It was precise, well formatted, and wrong in 11 specific places. The deviation calculation used the Compact's internal coordinate system rather than the jointly ratified Corridor Authority framework. The response protocol cited was a domestic security ordinance that had not been filed with the Interstellar Transit Registry. The crew of the patrol fleet was listed as acting within authorized parameters, but the authorization reference number in the report predated the treaty that established those parameters by 8 years. Zara worked through the night. By morning, she had a 41-page counter-analysis. She filed it to the Interstellar Harm Accountability Tribunal at 7 in the morning and then went to work. Her supervisor, a Thalesi named Oven with 4 decades of xenolegal experience, called her into his office at 9:30. "You filed to the IHAT," he said. He was not asking. "I filed to the IHAT," she said. "On the Meridian Lark incident." "Yes." Oven looked at her for a long moment. "I know what Adiz was to you." "She was my sister," Zara said. "She was also 108 other people. I filed on behalf of all 109. She set a copy of the counter-analysis on his desk. "The Compact's filing is defective in 11 enumerable ways. I am a licensed practitioner in tribunal jurisdiction. The filing is valid. He picked up the analysis. He read for 3 minutes. He set it back down. What do you need? He said. She told him. The IHAT had a reputation for moving carefully, which was a polite way of saying it moved slowly. Cases sat in review queues for months while preliminary panels assessed jurisdiction, standing, and remedial scope. The Meridian Lark filing moved differently, because Zara had anticipated the 3 standard preliminary objections and addressed them preemptively in the original filing, so that the reviewing panel was not reading a complaint but a response to its own likely concerns, already answered and already cited to treaty text the compact had ratified. She knew which review thresholds triggered expedited standing assessments, which cross-reference flags activated parallel tracks. She filed 3 supplemental briefs in 8 days, each calibrated to trip a different threshold. On the 4th day, she submitted a formal request under Article 31 of the Harm Accountability Accords, invoking the mass casualty expedited review provision. 109 fatalities cleared the 40-victim threshold by 69. On the 12th day after the Lark's destruction, the tribunal issued a preliminary finding of jurisdictional validity and escalated the matter to full panel review. On the 14th day, the panel issued a provisional ruling. The vorreth compact's response was not consistent with treaty-compliant defensive protocol, and the incident required full accountability review under Articles 19 through 26 of the Accords. The compact's diplomatic mission filed a counterbrief within 6 hours. The counterbrief was 112 pages and cited precedents from 7 prior tribunal cases. Zara read it overnight. The next morning she filed a 30-page rebuttal demonstrating that 5 of the 7 precedents cited were factually distinguishable. 1 had been overturned on appeal, and 1 had never been applied to a mass casualty intercept event. She did this calmly, thoroughly, the way she had learned to work. Late, alone, with the kind of patience that grief builds when grief has nowhere else to go. The compact's legal team was experienced. They were not wrong about the law. But they had written the incident report, which meant they had made the 11 errors she found in the first 24 hours, and those errors were structural. They reflected the compact's internal assumption that its own domestic security framework governed its patrol fleet's behavior in jointly ratified transit corridors. That assumption was incorrect, and it was incorrect in ways that Zara could demonstrate with documents the compact itself had signed. On the 21st day, the tribunal panel issued a formal notice of accountability proceedings against the vorreth compact, naming the senior patrol commander of the intercept fleet, Fleet Director Soreth Venn, as the individual responsible for the engagement authorization. When the notice transmitted to the compact's home system, the compact's response was silence for 60 hours. Then it was a denial of jurisdiction. Then it was a formal refusal to deliver Fleet Director Venn for proceedings. Zara had expected this. She had, in fact, prepared for it. Article 38 of the Harm Accountability Accords was rarely invoked. It had been drafted 15 years ago and applied only twice, both times in circumstances so extreme that most practitioners treated it as a theoretical provision rather than a live procedural tool. It required a full tribunal panel finding of mass casualty liability, combined with a respondent's formal refusal to comply, and it authorized the tribunal to refer the matter to the Earth Security Council for enforcement consideration. Zara had included a draft Article 38 referral in Appendix C of her original filing. The compact's posture in the first 24 hours, the routing anomaly classification, the domestic ordnance citation, the pre-treaty authorization number, had made noncompliance the probable outcome, and she had prepared for it accordingly. Her supervisor had read Appendix C and not said anything. The 3 senior partners who reviewed the filing before she submitted it had each, separately, asked her whether she was certain. She had been certain. The Article 38 referral was transmitted to the Earth Security Council on day 23. The Security Council met in emergency session the following morning. Zara was not in the session. She was in a conference room on Galara Station, eating a sandwich she had forgotten was in her bag since the previous day, when Oven walked in and told her the vote count. She had been surprised by how much ordinary life had persisted through the past 3 weeks, the need to eat, to sleep, to check her messages in the morning before she was fully awake. Grief, she had found, was not a suspension of the ordinary. It ran underneath everything, present in every room she entered, in every task she finished, like a frequency she had stopped trying to tune out. 19-0. Earth's enforcement mandate had passed 19-0, with 0 abstentions, because when 109 civilians were killed in a transit corridor that both parties had ratified, and the responsible party had filed a defective incident report and then refused accountability proceedings, there was not a seat on the Security Council that could be occupied by someone comfortable with abstention. The Meridian Reach assembles in 48 hours, Oven said. She did not ask how many ships. She found out 2 hours later when the press release cleared. 290 warships, drawn from 4 fleet commands, under the designation Meridian Reach in explicit reference to the civilian transport whose name no one in the enforcement action would be permitted to forget. Zara was on a Security Council transport heading to the proceedings location, a neutral space tribunal platform 9 light towers from the compact's home system, when the Meridian Reach dropped out of transit drive. She watched the deployment on the platform's navigation display. 290 signatures blooming across the board like a tide coming in, unhurried and total, settling into formation with the kind of precision that came from months of planning distilled into less than a minute of execution. The display's range grid showed the formation extending across the full approach corridor to the compact's primary inhabited system. Nothing moving in the corridor was not being observed. Nothing moving in the corridor was outside weapons range. The platform's own communications officer had gone quiet when the formation completed, not a frightened quiet, but the specific quiet of someone looking at something very large and very organized and understanding, in a way that a verbal briefing had not fully conveyed, what the Earth Security Council meant when it said enforcement action. Fleet Director Soreth Ven had been detained by the compact's own Interior Security Division that morning, which told her everything she needed to know about what the compact's political structure had concluded from 290 signatures on a navigation display. The tribunal panel convened at 1400 hours. Zara sat in the gallery. She was not there as lead filer. The tribunal's senior advocates had taken primary representation at this stage, as was standard procedure once an Article 38 referral activated. She was there because she had never stopped being Adi's older sister, and because someone who had put 23 days into getting this moment needed to be present for it. Ven was brought in through the side entrance in compact security restraints. He was a tall figure, gray-plated and angular, with the flat register visual sensors that vorreth physiology used in place of eyes. Zara had read everything the tribunal database held on him. He had 41 years of service. He had a family. He had made a calculation, 11 kilometers of deviation in a jointly ratified corridor, and had issued an engagement order, and the calculation had been wrong about what human children were worth. He looked out at the gallery when they brought him in. Zara did not know if vorreth visual sensors could distinguish individual human faces at gallery distance. She did not look away. The presiding advocate read the formal charge, 109 counts of unlawful killing under Accord's Article 20. The deviation calculation, corrected under the jointly ratified framework, had measured 11.2 kilometers. The corridor buffer zone was 30. The Lark had not been outside the buffer. The engagement had not been authorized by any valid treaty provision. Ven had known the deviation was minor, before he issued the order. Ven entered a statement of partial responsibility. His legal team had advised this as the minimum damage posture. Partial responsibility was still responsibility. The tribunal did not offer acquittal to commanders who had authorized the killing of 109 civilians in a protected corridor. The buffer zone was 30 kilometers. 11.2 was 11.2. There was no version of that arithmetic in which the patrol fleet had acted within its treaty authority, and Zara had spent 23 days making certain every panel member understood why. Outside the platform's hull, in the middle dark between two systems, 290 warships held their formation. The proceedings lasted 4 hours. The formal finding came at 1820. Zara sat in the gallery and watched the presiding advocate read it into the record. Fleet Director vorreth Ven, found responsible for the unlawful killing of 109 civilians in a corridor authority-protected transit lane. The vorreth Compact found in breach of Articles 19, 20, and 23 of the Harm Accountability Accords. The Compact's designated patrol authority suspended from jointly ratified transit corridors for a period of not less than 14 years, pending full compliance and remediation review. The Meridian Reach enforcement action authorized to remain on station until all compliance conditions were satisfied. Ven said something when the finding was read. His voice was too low to carry to the gallery, and the translation feed was on a half-second delay. Whatever he said, the presiding advocate noted it in the record and moved on. Zara sat until the chamber cleared. She did not move when the other gallery observers filed out, or when the tribunal staff began resetting the room for the next session, or when the platform's ambient lights shifted to a cooler tone, indicating the formal session had closed. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the empty dock where Ven had stood. 109 people. A 17-year-old girl on her way home after 3 months away. 11 kilometers corrected. Outside in the dark, the Meridian Reach was still there. She stood up, she picked up her bag. She walked out into the corridor, where the transit display was already showing departure schedules, and she found the first available transport back to Galara Station. There was work waiting. There was always work waiting. But she had learned, in the 23 days between an incident report on a public feed and a formal finding read into tribunal record, that work was not the opposite of grief. Work was what grief became when it found a use for itself, when it learned the 11 innumerable errors in the document that had tried to make 109 people disappear, and decided that disappearing them was not acceptable, and built, piece by piece, the case that said so. The Meridian Reach was still holding. She had made sure of that.